Hi, everyone, and welcome. It is Friday, and we have this week's edition of the WION-VOA co-production. We're now just 11 days from Election Day here in the U.S., and across the country, about 14 million voters are members of union workers, organizations formed to protect their rights. But even though union members make up a small part of the American electorate, presidential candidates eagerly seek their endorsement. VOA's congressional correspondent Katherine Gibson reports from Nevada, where unions have a powerful voice in electing either former President Donald Trump or Vice President Kamala Harris.
At a rally for Vice President Kamala Harris, excitement among union workers for her plan to end taxes on tips or gratuities that workers receive.
I know that Vice President Kamala Harris has a plan, a clear plan to end federal taxes on tips for us service workers here in Nevada. That's right, that's right. And that Donald Trump pretending he is the tipped workers' savior is a dangerous lie.
Former President and Republican candidate Donald Trump has also visited the city that relies on the service industry to promote his plan of no taxes on tips for casino dealers, waitresses, and housekeepers.
That is going to be adored by the employees, by all of the employees, particularly that don't have salaries and that they work on tips. That's going to be loved by them.
Trump has also earned the support of the Las Vegas Police Department.
The majority of our citizens trust law enforcement. And so if law enforcement says, hey, we believe this person has our best interests at heart, that they're going to keep you safe, that they're going to try and make our economy thrive, that people trust what we say.
Gramas has spoken about Trump's support for law enforcement at numerous rallies.
A man like Donald Trump and his campaign has always stood by us and said, no, I'm not going to bend to the winds of politics.
The endorsement of the tens of thousands of union workers employed in Nevada is eagerly sought by presidential candidates.
Harris also earned the endorsement of the local Teamsters Union. But the National Association of Freight Drivers and Warehouse Workers declined to endorse either presidential candidate.
Some voters here in Nevada see that as an important sign.
Well, they always went Democratic. So now if they're not doing Democratic, that means they must be leaning towards who? Trump.
But the Culinary Workers Union in Las Vegas did endorse Harris.
Working class voters are smart. They're not dumb, and they are a little skeptical. But the problem with President Trump is that he lies, and he lies a lot. However, Vice President Harris, this is part of an overall program to tackle the cost of living.
And they're knocking on doors to let voters know.
We're just canvassing for Kamala Harris. Okay.
We're all voting for her.
Big corporations coming in and price gouging us on food, gas, rent. So having, the right candidate in office, telling them the correct information, what I know as facts, that, Kamala's going to be there for us, the middle class, the union members.
Union members here in Nevada, one of just a handful of swing states that decide the presidential election, could end up casting the deciding vote. Katherine Gibson in Las Vegas, Nevada, VOA News.
All right, for additional reporting on the upcoming presidential election, we are now joined by VOA's Jessica Stone. Jessica, great to see you. While a majority of union endorsements have gone to Kamala Harris, we've learned that the National Border Patrol Union has endorsed Donald Trump for president. Does this have the potential to impact votes in border states?
It's a good question because he has gotten this endorsement before, but this is the National Border Patrol Union. It's the largest border patrol union in the country, and it gave him this endorsement earlier this month, as you said. It has been a staunch backer of Trump's border policies throughout his tenure. The only time it broke with him, actually, was in support of the Senate bill, which he did not back, which was ultimately not passed, something that Kamala Harris points out time and again. During an interview, in fact, she was asked about her own border policy approach and that endorsement by Fox News, and she empathized with the agents. She said, look, I understand that they're frustrated. Now, Harris has consistently, though, defended the Biden-Harris position on the border, defending even the release of dozens of executive orders, which essentially ended Remain in Mexico and allowed those migrants to come across the border and effectively gain asylum inside the United States. We should point out, though, that just ahead of the election, we actually have a record low in illegal border crossings. It is at the lowest level since 2020. And you ask, of course, about the impact on the vote. Arizona, a huge swing state that we've just been learning a lot about. Trump currently has a slight lead over Harris, and immigration is a top issue in that state. Susan?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And Jessica, I wanted to ask you, given the fact that American labor unions have endorsed members of both political parties, what does that tell us about the way the candidates themselves are interacting with union members in this election cycle?
I think it shows us that candidates on both sides of the aisle are now going after the union vote. Pew Research took a look at this question. It said it found that union workers are still a majority supporter of Democratic Party initiatives, that 43% of them are backing Harris and believe her policies are the best for the country. But another 53% say that without unions, the country would go in the wrong direction. So there is broad-based support for unionization, even though those 14 million Americans are just a drop in the bucket for the numbers who are actually in a union. One thing I think that's really important to point out, if you remember back in during the Republican National Convention, we actually saw a union boss, the president of the Teamsters Union, talking at the Republican National Convention, and the Teamsters has not endorsed any candidate. But significant that a union boss would be on the stage at the Republican National Convention. And importantly, something that Donald Trump has been trying to wean away some of those union voters, arguing that unions have not, and Democratic policies really have not been what's good for those union voters. Susan?
Now, while a majority of union endorsements have gone to Kamala Harris, the National Border Patrol Union has endorsed former President Donald Trump for president, not surprisingly, considering the fact that he has talked about the importance of border policies, border security, and illegal immigration. And it's no secret that those working on the border in any capacity are overwhelmed at this point. But nonetheless, for example, unions like the United Auto Workers, it shows that their members, for the most part, support Kamala Harris as opposed to Donald Trump. Although some had come out and said that it is not us that support Harris, it is our leadership. But nonetheless, in those states that do matter, like Pennsylvania and Michigan, it appears Harris has the lead in that sense. Now, also, given the fact that American labor unions have endorsed members of both political parties, the question that remains is, what does that tell us about the way candidates are interacting with unions in this election cycle? It's important to note that historically, unions always backed Democrats. However, this cycle is not similar like any other cycle, so it'll be interesting to see those numbers after November 5th. But let me move on. People in all 50 states will vote in this year's U.S. presidential election, but it's the outcome from 7 so-called swing states that will likely determine the winner, as we mentioned earlier. The southwestern state of Arizona has traditionally favored Republican candidates, but Democrat Joe Biden won the state in 2020, and its electoral votes are up for grabs again in 2024. From Arizona, VOA's Dora Mehkwar has the story.
Arizona, home to more than 7 million people, historically leans towards Republicans. Over the past 76 years, only 3 Democratic presidential candidates have won the southwestern state. Joe Biden pulled off a narrow victory in 2020, and this election year, the race is tight again.
I think it kind of underscores kind of this independent nature of Arizona. We've kind of, it's a strongly unaffiliated, but also kind of libertarian.
Libertarians believe that liberty is the most important political value and that it can be achieved by limiting government power.
Predicting their vote becomes very challenging because how they vote in one election doesn't necessarily mean they're going to vote in the next election. And they're notoriously ticket splitters, right? So they vote differently.
The electorate in Arizona is changing, including a growing Hispanic population that is increasingly coming of age to vote.
For this election, those Gen Z voters, those under the age of 30, are now mirroring the population in general of Arizona, and that's occurring for the first time. And so there is definitely a trend among older Latino voters, perhaps, of not being distinctly or primarily Democrat. Younger voters tend to be.
The other major change in voting patterns is the large number of people, particularly from California, who are moving to Arizona.
Right, they tend to be a more democratic or liberal vote that has kind of come in and permeate some of our, particularly our larger metropolitan areas.
Maricopa County is home to the state capital of Phoenix and has more than half of Arizona's total population. Whoever wins Maricopa usually wins the state.
It's that process where we have these big cities that are now coming to dominate state-level politics.
Riley says the issues that Arizonans care most about are the economy, reproductive rights, and immigration. Two of those issues are on the November ballot, including Proposition 139, which would codify a woman's right to abortion in Arizona and could drive more people to the polls.
It could have a pretty significant impact. So in terms of states where we've seen this happen in the past, we have seen a bump in voters showing up.
Proposition 314 would make illegally crossing the Arizona-Mexico border a state crime, in addition to a federal crime. One issue could drive more liberal voters to the polls, while the other could energize more conservative voters.
We might see some split ticking there, right, that they maybe feel strongly on immigration and the border issue and would vote for one candidate there, but also feel strongly about reproductive rights and vote differently there.
Which means some Arizonans could vote to protect abortion rights, then split on voting for either former President Donald Trump or for Vice President Kamala Harris. Dora McQuarr, VOA News, Phoenix, Arizona.
And Jessica, we just earlier heard a report by your colleague, Dora McQuarr, about what's happening in Arizona. Arizona is already counting votes in Maricopa County. What do these early vote counts tell us about the direction of the state and its 11 electoral votes for the U.S. presidential election? It seems Arizona is at play now.
So important to point out, Maricopa County is the county around the capital city of Phoenix. It's the most populous county in Arizona. And the reason that it's important to watch what's happening there is, of course, it may give us some indication of what's going to happen across the state. One huge difference we're seeing in this election cycle is that Republicans are actually early voting. In fact, they're voting in greater numbers than they certainly did during 2020, which, of course, we should point out was during COVID. And so there was a lot of opportunity to do that kind of voting, but they were instructed at the time that they should vote in person, that the early voting process was not trustworthy. Now in Arizona, we're seeing that they are way ahead on the early vote on the Republican side. GOP having more than 214,000 ballots already cast and counted to 179,000 on the Democratic side. A total number of early votes, though, considerably down from the 2020 election because, again, we don't have the same environmental problems, really, in terms of voting. It's safer to vote in person and early. I think it's something that we're watching. We don't know that it's going to change the outcome in Arizona or the rest of the country, but we won't probably see that blue mirage that we saw where we had an upswing of blue votes going into the election, and only on election night did we see Republicans and their ballots be counted and therefore sort of come back to a race neck and neck. So we'll have to see how this impacts the race, but certainly Republicans are crowing that they're very encouraged by these prospects. Susan?
Yes, really remarkable to see. But how did Arizona, the home of a famous Republican like John McCain, become a swing state?
Yeah, for most of my lifetime and probably yours, Arizona has been pretty reliably red, the home of John McCain, although we have to point out John McCain, the type of Republican that's a pretty moderate Republican. Remember when he ran for president, he was really a renegade, and he ran on being very down the middle. And it is a swing state by slim margins. Biden only won the state in 2020 by just 10,000 votes. Prior to that, the only other Democratic presidential candidate who has won the state was Bill Clinton, another moderate Republican, in 1996. So the big changes there are the demographic shifts that you heard from Catherine Gibson's report and Dora McGuire's report, where you've got an influx of Californians who are bringing their more liberal progressive ideas to the state. You've got an additional influx of young Hispanic voters, primarily who often vote Democratic. In fact, 1 out of 4 voters in the state of Arizona right now are Latino. So it's going to be an interesting state to watch how it goes this cycle. A lot of political nerds in town are going to be watching very closely, Susan.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for all of that and all those assessments and updates. And I look forward to speaking to you again next week. We're almost there.
We're almost there.
The bill faces significant criticism